Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to the A24 project here on the Nerd Party Network, the only podcast to take you through the back catalogue of A24, review the latest releases, and bring you interviews with the people in front of and behind the camera. On today's show, well, let me tell you something, brother. What you gonna do when Dallas Dynamite King and Lee the Hangman Hutchison square up with the 24-inch pythons combined and go wild on their review of the Iron Claw? Lee, how are you? Ready to step into the squared circle this week?
I'm looking forward to it. I don't think I'll be laying the smackdown or sort of the, what's it called? The wrestling move that they do in the film. Me and my brother used to do it as kids. Like the suplex, is it? Or something like that?
You mean a very basic move like the suplex? Or a power slam?
The power slam, yeah. I'm definitely not going to be power slamming this film. So, yeah, I'll go along with that analogy.
Okay, cool. Well, before we step into the squared circle, just one bit of A24 news this week, and it's the news that Apple TV and A24 are continuing their partnership and are going to co-produce a reinterpretation of Akira Kurosawa's crime thriller, High and Low, and this will be directed by Spike Lee, and it will star Denzel Washington and, as just announced yesterday, Halle Berry as well. So, Lee, what do you make of this news? Are you familiar with the original film, and are you slightly skeptical, given that the last time that Spike Lee did a remake of a foreign language film from Southeast Asia, it was Old Boy?
I'm willing to give him a pass for that. I must admit, I was quite excited.
Because he's Spike Lee.
Yeah, because he's Spike Lee and Denzel Washington and Halle Berry. You know, she's yeah, it's one of those ones. It's hard to kind of predict what you'll always get with her, but sort of Denzel is always kind of a bit of a sign of quality, and I really enjoyed his sort of A24 film Macbeth as well. So no, I'm really looking forward to this one. It continues to amaze me that sort of A24 have a partnership with HBO Max now, Showtime, Apple TV Plus, and so on. It's one of those ones. I don't know who's in charge of organizing these things, but it's amazing how we're still quite unclear on where all of these things sometimes slot into.
Yeah, it is a bit confusing, isn't it? Because you would there for like a good year and a half, there were Apple exclusive films which would drop on Apple, such as the Tragedy of Macbeth and several others. And then you had the news that they're releasing their own app where all their films are available under the one app. But then HBO Max now apparently has exclusive streaming rights to all new A24 films for, I guess, an indeterminate period of time. And it's like, okay, so where do you go to watch all of these films? Of course, it's just made even more complicated over here in the UK where everyone has a different distributor. But, we've covered that topic pretty extensively over the last few years, haven't we? So, time for The Iron Claw. Now, this film is written and directed by Sean Durkin, who's previously directed Marcy, May, Marlene, and The Nest. And the film stars Zac Efron, Jeremy Allen White, Harris Dickinson, Maura Tierney, and Holt McCallany. Now, it tells the true story of the inseparable Von Erich brothers, who made history in the intensely competitive world of professional wrestling in the 1980s through tragedy and triumph under the stewardship of their domineering father and coach. The brothers seek larger-than-life immortality on the biggest stage in sports. So, Lee, I guess a couple of questions. Given that I think it's safe to say the larger of the wrestling fans on this podcast. I mean, your knowledge of wrestling in general, and then I guess your knowledge of the Von Erich family or the Von Erich dynasty before going into this film.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones. I think I'm, as you mentioned, a bit of a wrestling novice, but I kind of felt like I knew enough to get me by, really. Like even like Ric Flair, I was familiar with him, for example.
You were at least okay, yeah.
Some of that, and even I was aware of the Von Erich family. Like if you had put a gun to my head and told me to tell you what I knew about them, I kind of would know that they're this sort of wrestling family, and there's some sort of jinx or something that surrounds them. that much I kind of knew. But I think one thing that was really helpful for me was I was very able to identify when someone was playing a heel quite early on. And I was like, yeah, I think I've got enough to get by here. Oh, I can see what this brother is up to, and sort of the different roles and perhaps the kind of the theatrical elements about sort of how wrestling works. I sort of was familiar enough with them that I was able to kind of put into context what was actually kind of going on here, sort of beyond the superficial of like, oh, wrestling's all fake. It's all these different roles that people play, and that kind of helped.
He said the dreaded phrase that wrestling is fake. Wrestling is not fake. It is just predetermined and scripted. That is all. Ask anyone who's ever had an injury from a wrestling match, and it is definitely not fake. They do well. I mean, you see in this film as well, the injuries and stuff that people sustain. Um, I mean, so yeah, so that's you're well aware of the baby faces, the heels, whether something is a shoot or a work, etc., etc. So I mean, I sort of grew up watching what it was WWF back then, before they had a fight which they lost in terms of trademarks and copyrights with a panda. Um, yeah, so in the very early 90s, when it was, back then it was Hogan's. This was when Ric Flair jumped ship from WCW to WWF. Bret Hart was my favorite back then, and then we got into the Attitude Era with Stone Cold and The Rock, who has just come back. And to yes, much controversy. But hey, it's all a big giant soap opera, isn't it? Really. So I was familiar with the Von Erichs. I remember Kerry Von Erich when he was in the WWF as the Texas Tornado. But I have to say, even I was slightly unaware of the full extent of the tragedy of the Von Erich family and the Von Erich curse, so to speak. So, I mean, you normally like to keep your powder dry in terms of what you know about a film before going in, sort of trying to avoid the trailers and stuff like that. So, I mean, what were you looking forward to with this film? What was the appeal of it for you?
The cast, it's one of those ones. It's been impossible in the UK to avoid the trailers for Iron Claw, similar to kind of a few A24 films that are sort of that are out just now. We've had to a few months wait for this one and so on, but it was one of those ones. I've been always someone that really always thought quite highly of Zac Efron. I think he is a really good showman. I really like Sean Durkin's previous
Greatest
movies
showman,
as well.
one might say.
He's just he's a really, as I mentioned earlier, wrestling in a way is this kind of quite theatrical, character-driven sort of thing. And I thought, you know what, someone like Zac Efron lends himself really well to that. And I thought it'll be a great opportunity to showcase to some of the people that still think of him as the High School Musical guy after all these years. And obviously, I've not long finished watching sort of Bear season 2 as well, so I'm excited to see sort of Jeremy Allen White outside of his whites, and Harris Dickinson continues to pick really interesting films. So it was one of those ones. I was just really excited to see what Sean Durkin did with them, because I think when you think of his films as well, someone like Jude Law is this established actor. He did something really fantastic with him in The Nest that we hadn't been perhaps seen in a while, with Martha May Marlene and so on. We get that first introduction to a new Olsen family member as well. So
there was a third sister.
So he's one of these ones where you're like, oh, I can't wait to see what he gives these actors a showcase to do. And it was one of those ones, not that I felt the trailer spoiled it, but I was like, oh, I know there was a curse. So, definitely one of them dies, and I'm watching to think, oh, I don't see that person. It's maybe that person, but I perhaps didn't realize the full scale of it. And it's one of those movies where, knowing so little going in, I was immediately sort of lazing on the couch after watching it, just reading the Wikipedia page on Kerry, the Wikipedia page on the family, the Wikipedia page on sort of this kid that we don't see featured. Oh my God, the tragedy behind the oldest, kid that we, died so young. When you read that and you're like, oh my God, he was electrocuted on something and then drowned in a bit of snow that was melting, and you're like, God, they really were cursed. And you come away from the film thinking they were the most cursed family ever. And then when you dive into it even further, you're like, Christ, I could understand why he would have that sort of anxiety. And it's been such a rewarding thing to have gone in so surprised, and then to be able to just discover there's this whole world to read about and explore afterwards.
Yeah, no, yeah, I was familiar with the story, but yeah, even I think, I knew of like the brothers who were like in the wrestling world per se, but didn't know the full extent of like, the like, yeah, it's a weird one. The oldest brother, but then also like in the same way, the sort of the youngest brother because he died so young as well, and yeah, they're just sort of this tragedy and how it all, but it's all sort of, I guess, for I don't want to do spoilers or whatever, but I guess there's a certain reason why it's told from one particular brother's perspective, and that brother is the Kevin Von Erich, played by Zac Efron, who, it's not, I don't want to say, that horrible phrase, especially when it comes around to sort of Oscar time, with transformative, performances. But I think it's fair to say that he did, you know, do a lot of work on his body for this, in a different way to his role in Baywatch. But I'm sure he did call up his Baywatch co-star Dwayne the Rock Johnson for some tips on how to get into shape for wrestling, and I believe they all did wrestling training and stuff like that in order to do, deliver the moves in the ring on camera and stuff like that. And I was really, really impressed by him in this, in the fact that the shape that he got himself into. If you are a fan of wrestling, it's like, all I can say is he looks like a wrestler from the 1980s. Wrestling has sort of evolved, I guess, over the years, and you've now got your cruiserweights and stuff like that, or you've got, the smaller wrestlers have been able to, rise to the top occasionally, but this is, your typical wrestling body. It's quite short, stocky, but it's got, this sort of Tom Hardy trapezoids and everything like that, and it's a real sort of physical transformation that he's gone, but it's also, like you said, showcases his acting chops. Woo! Just so I got to say that whenever I say the word chop, given that Ric Flair's in the movie as well. But yeah, no, he is very, very impressive here, and actually the whole
He
family
should have been
is.
nominated for an Oscar. I think it's safe to say.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was going to touch on that later, but I guess we could touch on it now. Do you think that A24 should have held this film back until this year, given that, Past Lives and a couple of other films were doing the rounds in the Oscar? Was this just one film too many for them, and it just got unfortunately lost in the mix? It feels like if they'd pushed it back a year, Zac Efron might have stood a better chance, I think. But I mean, I think they did get. They have had several awards and nominations for casting overall, for the ensemble, because it is a terrific cast.
It was a hard one to break into this year, wasn't it? Where you do look at the five, you had like Paul Giamatti, Bradley Cooper, Coleman Domingo, which I haven't seen Rust in yet, so couldn't possibly comment on that. Cillian Murphy and Jeffrey Wright. It's like, I would have had him perhaps ahead of Jeffrey Wright, perhaps maybe Bradley Cooper as well, and so on. And yeah, I think it's one of those ones that it's always been said over the years, A24's budget for these things isn't always that high, and it is amazing that, I think we all perhaps expected some of their kind of one of their films at least to do quite well. I was surprised how. I was very surprised at how Zone of Interest seemed to come out of nowhere and gain that momentum, with some of the nominations and so on. And I think perhaps maybe at the end the money needed to be just rebalanced somewhere else. I'm not too sure, but yeah, it's one of those ones. It's always hard enough for them to fight on one front, let alone two, especially not three. So I think he was unlucky, and it's one of those ones you can gamble on going, hey, the film, the last I saw, it's grossed well over like 40 million worldwide, which is a huge hit, A24 size and so on. They've banked that. Could they have banked, held off this film another year and Zac Efron gets nominated in 2025? Maybe, but if you're a poker player, what do you go for? Do you bank the money now or hope that there's an easier entrance next year? Because you never know who's going to come out of nowhere. But I don't think anyone would have anticipated months ago Coleman Domingo would have broke in, that Paul Giamatti's performance in The Holdovers, Jeffrey Wright's, etc. So I think they they did the best that they could at the time. It was just disappointing. If only there was 10 spaces.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is kind of almost poetic, given Kevin Von Erich's sort of legacy in the wrestling world, and in that he is the brother that never quite makes it himself. Actually, Zach's missed out on a nomination to all these other actors, and Kevin was the one that was continually just missing out on that big title shot or that big title run and stuff like that. And it's really interesting to watch. I mean, what was great about the film, I think, is if you are a wrestling fan, there is a lot in there for you to appreciate. But it also works even if you're not a wrestling fan. At its core, it is a family drama that happens to be set in the world of wrestling. But if you're a fan of wrestling, or even if you're not, there is a lot to get out of it. I like how it sort of blurs it sort of showcases the reality almost of the wrestling world, and particularly looking at someone like Kevin Von Erich, who is physically what you would expect from a world heavyweight champion, but that isn't everything. You need that X factor. You need that work. I mean, you can see there's the great scene where he's recording what looks like is a live promo, and then it's like cut, and then it's actually just being recorded for a show, and he's trying to do it, and he keeps fluffing his lines, and his brother's putting him off and stuff like that, and it shows you that it is all scripted. They sometimes, I guess, when you're out in front of a crowd, they often sort of say, it's basically it's scripted, but it's not, and that you have your key points you've got to hit. You've got to mention the date that you're going to fight someone, what the event is, and stuff like that, and then just run them down and stuff like that. So you need to have great physique, you need to have great skill and technique, but you also need to be good at delivering promos and stuff like that. And that's something which one of his brothers, David Von Erich, played by Harris Dickinson, is much better at. And then you've got this sort of dynamic, they work perfectly as a trio, but they've all got their sort of different skills. But then as the dad says, he's got this ranking system, and the rankings can always change. And at one point or another, Kevin just continually gets sort of passed over in favor of one of the other brothers. But then, I guess you've got to look at it that if he was pushed harder, would he have potentially suffered the same fate as some of his other brothers?
Yeah, it's an interesting one to consider, and it is one of those ones. It's like that flip of a coin, really, isn't it? When at one point it's being decided between him and one of his other brothers who takes part in a fight, and sometimes that's just the luck of it all, isn't it? And there are so many moments where you watch the film and it's like the sliding doors moment, or if someone didn't get on a bike at this point, or if someone didn't do this or that, or someone ran into the ring and did a great shoot, for example. It's amazing how much of their family is just crazy little moments that kind of define them and so on. And yeah, it could easily have been him that didn't make the cut, and who knows what the consequences would have been.
Yep, I mean, there's that moment where he sort of just keeps beating Ric Flair down to a pulp because he's letting out all this frustration and stuff like that. It wasn't the way that the match was meant to end, but he gets over in some ways, but then not in others. And it's interesting to see, like you say, a lot of it is down, not maybe necessarily on luck, but it's all down to the crowd are the ones that will essentially anoint you a champion or not. And I mean, you just have to look at something like the situation at the moment in WWE, where Cody Rhodes was winning the Royal Rumble and was going to challenge Roman Reigns, but then The Rock comes back and he wants to fight his cousin for the title of head of the table at WrestleMania. So Cody sort of steps aside, but then within a week, there's all this negative fan reaction, and The Rock is, clearly clever enough to know when something's not working, and then sort of basically then turns heel at the WrestleMania kickoff show, slaps Cody Rhodes, and then sides with his own family and stuff like this. And so, that's an example of how a storyline sort of can change in an instant because, of how the crowd reacts. And it sort of showcases here with the family and how certain brothers rise above Kevin purely based on crowd reaction and stuff like that. Basically, David was the one that was better on the mic, and that was why his dad decided to push him against Ric Flair in the first thing. But then everyone eventually sort of gets their shot, and it's basically how you deal with the fame and also the stresses. Because I mean, a lot of the wrestlers talk about how the fact that basically they would be on the road for 350 days out of 365 a year. You might get sort of Christmas off, but you'd be on the road, and it's incredibly grueling on the body and stuff like that, and also on the mind, I guess, for many of these wrestlers. And you can see the physical and mental toll that it's taken on some of these brothers across the movie.
Yeah, and it did feel like a bit of a journey. And the one thing, it's one of those ones I almost wish there was like a 3 hour version of this film where it would have been interesting to kind of see a bit more of the life on the road, etc., as these performers and so on. It did feel like it would be quite self-contained, often within sort of kind of Texas and so on. But again, sometimes that comes down to budget and so on. It just felt like there was that element that was just missing a little bit. That was a bit more show and tell sometimes, these experiences that they were having on the road. And you would sometimes maybe just lose a little bit of bearing of time sometimes due to that. You'd hear, oh, someone's off to Japan, and so we've got there already. I thought that was like 3 months ago, and you could get a bit lost with it, and maybe the film just needed that little bit more time just to let that aspect kind of flourish. I mean, the film was completely fantastic without it, but would there have been would that have made for a slightly even better film? Potentially so, but yeah, I think that was just the one thing that was missing between a lot of the tragedies.
Yeah, because no, I know what you're saying about because they talk about sort of David Van Eyck going off to wrestle Ric Flair for the championship in Japan, and you think, oh great, well we'll get to see that, and then we don't. And I guess part of that is down to the fact that Kevin is the main focal point of the story, and because he never really broke out and left, because I mean, like the family seemed to be based, their wrestling federation was based mainly in Texas, so they would go around the sort of Texas circus, but it was the likes of the what was NWA at the time and WWF were the ones that were touring sort of nationwide and stuff like that, where you had these slightly smaller rural wrestling federations that were doing that. But yeah, because it was focused on Kevin, it did seem to contain the story slightly. But you bring up something there, but sort of wanting to see a bit more, and I mean there is a lot more to the story, and you sort of did hinted earlier about the fact that there was an entire brother sort of who was taken out of the movie and not even referenced. And Sean Durkin has said in interviews over the last few months that for several years that he was writing the script, the brother was in and then he was out and then he was back in again, and then it was just, how do you tell this story? And he basically felt that given that so many of the brothers suffered a similar fate, that it was just, how do you make them different enough to warrant telling the same story? But then at one point it just becomes so bleak that it would have been almost impossible to pull out of that almost sort of nosedive that the film was going through. And how much, I mean it's true, this family went through all of this tragedy, but how much can you realistically show on film and still, I guess, keep the audience with you to the finish line? This is following a man who is so repressed in his emotions. They can only come out, like, I guess, when he's alive in the ring. That's the only time, and that's when he ends up sort of costing himself basically a match through taking out on a wrestler. And it almost cost him his marriage, and from seeing his kids and stuff, because he's unable to process this. He thinks that by them staying with him that they will become, I mean, he even sort of keeps his original name for the kids, because rather than the Von Outs, because he doesn't want to pass on the curse to them. He's just obsessive about it, and it's a fantastic thing to watch, and you really do feel for Zac Efron. And it reminded me also of one of my other favorite sporting movies, which is Warrior, which also features two sort of estranged brothers fighting and stuff like that. And yeah, I don't have a brother myself, but I certainly sort of felt for him during this movie, and it certainly connected with a lot of of the male watchers of this film, with a lot of hashtag manly tears being shed during screenings of this one, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's one of those ones. I certainly didn't cry myself, but I was nearly there at the end and so on. But it was one of those ones. It was just testament to Zac Efron's performance. You're just watching this guy go through, the grind of it all and so on, and your heart breaks for him. And I do agree, having kind of read up on it all afterwards, like why they cut that additional Von Erich thing out, because it's very much the same, and it's one of those ones where, at the end of the day, they said it right at the beginning, first shot of the film, inspired by a true story and so on. And, at the end of the day, there's plenty that's been written about this family over the years. There's documentaries. I'm no doubt going to get around to it this week because I've never seen that episode. I've only ever seen a handful, but the dark side of the ring, etc. It's out there and so on, and it's even just some of there's the odd little bit of liberty about how things happened or connected, etc. But the film is its own thing, and it is really true to that story and experience as best as I can tell anyway. And yeah, there's nothing wrong sometimes with going on and doing your own bit of reading and picking up on the stories. But I don't know how they would have fitted in that extra person's story, Chris, and so on, and how that would have connected without sort of dragging the film and making it feel a bit longer, or where the flow would have been for that. I just think it just wouldn't have worked and so on. If Durkin couldn't make it work, I believe him.
Yeah, no, it's almost like you say, it's inspired by a true story, so you have to take dramatic license, and sometimes you have to move the timelines around a bit, or sort of condense certain people's storylines and amalgamate characters and stuff like that. But it is almost to the point where, for those who didn't know the story, I think if you'd included that character, there could have almost got to the point where they're like, well, this couldn't possibly have happened. This family couldn't have possibly experienced all this, and it might have almost taken them out of the film, even though it is true. There comes a point where it is almost too much, and I think, yeah, like you say, well, it would have been great to have the whole story. I think that's something like a long form documentary, like you say, would have been able to do. Whereas this, which is, I mean, even though it's still sort of 2 hours, 12 minutes, so you have a finite window in which to tell the story. And I think that, yeah, Sean Durkin did make the right choices overall. So, I mean, so you see the tragedy, you see the triumphs, but I mean, for you, I mean, what did you make of the actual wrestling scenes? I mean, I know that a lot of people, I think I did see a meme where it was like so I think it was like someone sitting back in a chair and then sitting right up, sort of peering towards the screen. It was basically all dads when Rush kicked in during the wrestling montage, and it was like, all right, here we go, this is it. What did you make of that wrestling montage, which basically showed when the moment that the Von Erich brothers sort of came together and their rise to the top as the best triple tag team in the world at the time?
Yeah, what I really liked about it was that it played up to the theatrical version of what these things are like, that you watch it and it's not sitting there thinking, like, you can't see the sort of the missed hit, the kind of the pulling the punches, and sort of like I'm not going to say the fake, but the theatrical version of sort of how you do these wrestles. I mean, obviously there was certainly a lot of kind of blood and sweat that takes place in these things, but you're watching it going, oh, it's like that type of wrestling. It's a drama. It's not a UFC where people are necessarily like really pounding each other. And I really like that as well. I can imagine it would have been easy to kind of, trying to avoid that perhaps, or something like that. And I watched it and I thought, oh, that is the genuine representation of what it was. It wasn't choreographed to such an extent that it didn't feel believable. It felt like top end amateur and so on, which is kind of what some of this stuff really was. And I really liked it. Yeah, if we'd saw more perhaps of kind of the WWF at the time, that might have been a bit different and so on. But no, this felt like what it was and what people really get out of these things and so on. It was an art form in itself, which I was really impressed with, and perhaps I didn't expect.
Yeah, no, I really, really enjoyed that sequence. I mean, I was briefly taken out of the movie when Tom Sawyer by Rush came on because it immediately made me think of the film I Love You Man and Paul Rudd slapping the bass when they go to see the Rush gig. But it reminded me in a way of, I don't know if you watched this when you were younger, but the British wrestling that was on a Saturday afternoon with like Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks and whatever. Um, it had that kind of feel to it, but I know what you say. It's like the way it was shot. It looked like, I use the word real, like with inverted commas, but it looked like real fighting. There wasn't the, like you say, or like the slapping of the legs when they were kicking and stuff like that, or the ways you didn't notice all the different ways that they protect the other wrestler when doing power slams and suplexes and stuff like that. It looked like the flamboyant, over the top fighting style that people come to see, the gladiatorial contests in the ring and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed that sequence, and it was nice to see as a wrestling fan, seeing sort of other wrestling characters that I was aware of, like the Fabulous Freebirds and the Iron Sheik and stuff like that. So yeah, lots of little nods for the wrestling nerds out there, but still a rollicking good time. And yes, that was probably one of the high points of the movie from a technical standpoint, but also I guess for the Von Erichs as well.
Yeah, it's just it's one of those ones. It's opened up a world for me that I can't wait to dive into. I mean, one of the, as I say, I just there was a bit where we talk about some of the biggest shocks and surprises you ever get in films, and the bit where like Kerry, despite the injury he takes on, that he made it to the WWF. I just sat there on the screen going, no way! Like that was one of the biggest shocks ever. And the
I actually had to Google that actually as well, because I was like, I was like, but he was in the WWE, and I was like, no, but it's like, no, he could not have been wrestling in the WWE with a prosthetic foot. That can't. And then I went, bloody hell, he did. I mean, yeah, he did have a short-lived run, but the fact that nobody twigged, I mean, I was like, that had to have been made up for the film. They must have added that for a bit of extra drama, and I was like, oh, that was real. I mean, it's like that was one of the too crazy to be true, but it is true
Yeah, I
moments.
never doubted it because I thought there's no chance with this film and what's going for that they've made up that. And he gets to the WWF, you're like, oh my god, I bet that's nailed on hat. I couldn't believe it. And I remember reading up afterwards that nearly everyone that he was working alongside did not know that he had that injury, which was just mind blowing. And for me, when I saw that, you're like, well, that's the pinnacle of this world that they were working in, and so on. And he made it despite these kind of obstacles. It was just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, at the time, and actually, I guess still, yeah, WWE was that was the place that you wanted to get to. You wanted to be the WWE champion. You wanted to be the Hulk Hogan or the Ric Flair of this world, and Kerry managed to get to the Intercontinental Championship. So for me, my actually preferred championship when I was growing up, it was my favorite wrestlers all held that one. The Mr. Perfects, the Rowdy Roddy Pipers, the Bret Harts, and whatever. That was the workhorse championship. That was the one that you got, and then after a while, you would then lose that title, but then you would graduate, you'd move up to the next bit. And sadly, Kerry never managed to break through to the next level, but still an incredible legacy that they left behind. And it was in 2009 that they were the whole family and the whole dynasty was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, and I think a rightful tribute to this family that maybe didn't all make it on the biggest stage, but clearly left an incredible mark on the world of wrestling.
And not that type of mark.
No, not that type of mark. You see, you're learning all the time. Yep. And once you dive into all these documentaries like Beyond the Mat and the Dark
Oh
Side of
yeah, I've seen a
Wrestling,
few
then
over the years. I watched, I think, the Chris Benoit one, and it was just a
oh,
brilliant series. And it feels like you could probably go on for 30 seasons with how much of the kind of characters and kind of rogues, if I'm even on the generous side, there are in that world.
yes. Well, given the latest set of allegations, I'm sure there's going to be a multi-part documentary on Vincent McMahon soon as well. So, oof, yes, but yes, no. On to lighter topics. So, now that you've seen this, I'm keen to sort of get your sort of barometer of where it would sit, I guess, in terms of, I guess, sort of sports movies? I mean, where does it sit among your favorite sort of sports movies? And then I guess, um, where about in terms of in the ever increasing wonderful pantheon of A24?
It's one of those ones I definitely want to see this one again. I'm really, really keen to catch this one again. I think this one would be in the top 25 or the sort of the top quarter really for me in terms of A24 films. I just thought every one of the performances was fantastic, and for it's not just the brothers, the father was fantastic, even sort of the I thought
Ah,
that
yes, I've forgotten to mention Hopper. He's one of my little favorite actors who pops up. Obviously he had the Mindhunter series with David Fincher, which is what basically one of his almost like first sort of leading roles in TV or film, whatever. But I remembered him in like so many films like Fight Club and stuff. Whenever he pops up, you're always like, oh yeah, I like that guy.
that guy and that thing, and yeah, just I thought the whole cast was great, and it's one of those ones where I'm really keen to watch this one again, and I'll depending on how the next few weeks go, I might catch this one again in sort of the cinemas. It was one of those ones where it's something I came away and I learned a lot about something that I didn't know and so on, and it's made me want to just, as I say, dive into these people more and so on. There's just such a fascinating story there that I'm genuinely surprised it didn't get told before now. And when you even talk about the wrestler, you think, oh, I'm surprised a Darren Aronofsky at the time didn't go for a story like this or others. And it's just a fascinating world and so on. And it's just one of those ones I just continue to hope something like this continues to propel Zac Efron forward and for people to look at him as the fantastic talent he is. But just a fantastic film. I'd have this in the top quarter of A24 films, and one I can't wait to experience again. What about for yourself as the born heel wrestler?
I thought it was really, really sort of strong, really sort of powerful. A great testament to, I think it did well in portraying wrestling realistically. I think it didn't sort of sugarcoat the trials and tribulations of wrestling, but it didn't make a mockery of it at any time. It was very respectful to it, so that's what I really liked about it. And yeah, the performance were fantastic. And yeah, it's one which I will go and see again. I saw it in New York at the beginning of the year, but I really do need to take my dad to it. He got me into wrestling all those years ago, so I feel like we should go for a father son trip to the cinema. For a wrestling movie that is not just featuring Dwayne the Rock Johnson in an action role, but actually is one about wrestling these days. And it's a wrestling movie which is certainly higher quality than anything that say like Hulk Hogan has produced over the years. You know, there have been some good wrestlers turn actors. Well, in certain roles such as Jesse Ventura in Predator and the like, and John Cena and Dave Batista have continued to surprise. Um, and yes, so yeah, definitely will be catching it once again on the road to WrestleMania.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. As I say, I just love that. I have my thoughts on wrestling, but this felt like it wasn't something that sneered at the business, the biz, as it were, or sort of mocked it, etc. I think that, and that's one of the best things that you can say about the film, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it was a fitting testimony to the world of wrestling, but also to this family that did so much for the world of wrestling as well. And yeah, like you say, I mean, hopefully, Zac Efron continues to pursue this type of role. I know it might be slightly disheartening for him to have put so much into a performance like this and then maybe feel like it hasn't been recognized like it should. But he's clearly very, very talented, and yeah, I hope he continues to rise up the ranks and does more movies like this. So yes, Zach, stay in the world of A24. A24 likes you, and yes, you should do more with them. I think more films like the weird and wacky ones that you get with A24, much better than the likes of Baywatch and stuff like that. um, Hey, just look like someone like Kristen Stewart, who started off in like the Twilights and whatever. She's gone on to do fantastic things while stepping into the world of independent film and A24. Although somebody tried to claim, I saw on Twitter or something the other day about, oh, can't wait for Love Lies Bleeding. It's her first A24 film, and I'm like, I think you'll find that was actually Equal starring Nicholas Hoult because it was released many many years ago,
And
which
as
everyone
one of
seems
the
to have
only two
forgotten
people
about.
to watch Equals, it's good that we're raising awareness.
Absolutely, which you can, of course, listen to our review of that on an earlier podcast. However, our next episode, coming up at the end of the month, will be Love Lies Bleeding, the new film starring Kristen Stewart from Saint Maud director Rose Glass, and we'll be reviewing that after we see it at the opening gala of this year's Glasgow Film Festival. It's been at Sundance, it's heading over to Berlinale, and then we'll catch it in Scotland in a couple of weeks' time, and then we'll be back to review that very, very soon. But until then, we're off to the showers after a sweaty time in the squared circle. And yes, it's been a right Royal Rumble, but we've enjoyed ourselves. We'll catch you soon.